I'm considering refinancing our home, but it's not the correct decision for everyone. Listen to learn more about who should and should not refinance. Hello, and welcome to the Wealth Minded MD podcast with your money best friends. I'm Dr. Brittany Halford,
And I'm Dr. Alicia Taylor.
and we're here to help you build wealth and make good money decisions so you can create the life you desire with more control over your time.
As we enter the final stretch of the year, if you're a doctor who thinks you might have overpaid on the IRS this year, we've got some important news for you.
Cerebral Wealth Academy has now opened enrollment for the course, The Doctor's 4-Week Guide to Smart Tax Planning, an online course designed specifically for medical professionals who have side gigs or locum tenens work.
This course includes everything from selecting the best business structure for your practice to advanced tax saving strategies and retirement planning.
On top of that, there are monthly live Q&A sessions with Alexis Galati, who's not only the founder of Cerebral Tax Advisors and the mastermind behind this course, but also my own personal tax advisor.
Enrollment is only open until September 30th, and if you use code WEALTH300, you'll save $300 on the course. Visit www.cerebralwealthacademy.com today.
Hey, Leisha, one of the most important financial tasks we do as doctors is protect ourselves, which means getting the right insurance. I recall purchasing my insurance policy just a few days before I graduated from residency. What was your experience?
So I got my insurance when I graduated from medical school right before I started residency. I actually called a few agents, but I had the best service from Pradeep Auto at PKA Insurance Group. He was super responsive and personable. Unlike some of the other agents, Pradeep actually got me quotes from all the major companies and actually took the time to explain the nuances in each of their policies. What I loved most is that he wasn't just this way for me. Whenever I would send one of my friends to him, he would not only speak to them, but he'd also let them know where to go or who to contact if there were better options or discounts available.
At PKA Insurance Group, Pradeep Auto and Matthew Peterson are independent brokers focusing on disability and life insurance. They excel in securing coverage for physicians and other medical professionals. Discounts on disability insurance can range from 10 to 40% depending on your situation. And there is now an A-plus rated carrier offering up to $10 million of life insurance without lapse. If you are very healthy with limited to no medical issues, approval is likely in 5 minutes. Reach out to PKA Insurance to discuss your disability or life insurance needs at www.pkainsurance.com or call 1-800-258-1018.
All right, now it is time for our Life is Lifing segment. And Leisha, there's a lot going on in my life, but give us an update on where you are. What's going on in your world?
Man, I am starting this very detailed research study, and it has all these moving parts. And I'm a sports doc, so it's involving athletes, collegiate athletes. And if anyone has ever worked with college students that are between the ages of 18 and 22, they will know that sometimes life can be, let's say, challenging. People forget things. I get it. Everyone is human. But there's something unique about my collegiate student athletes that I'm like, oh my goodness, my patience is being tested in more ways than I thought possible. It's also requiring me to coordinate with different people. And I'm sort of balancing this thing between making sure that things happen when they absolutely need to happen, but also giving people grace
Mm.
and also not micromanaging people. But it's interesting because I think that for a lot of projects, usually the person who cares the most is the person who started the project as a principal investigator. And that's me. I'm giving people free reign to like, okay, we need this by this date. And then sometimes it's not done. And I'm like, what happened? I'm like, okay, I don't want to scream at you like you're my child or anything, like you're my colleague, but also, come on now, my collegiate athletes. I'm like, y'all, you got one more time to miss this appointment now. Come on. So let's just say my character is being built because of the patience that is being required of me.
Well, good luck. I haven't done a research study in a while. The last one I did, it was more of a survey study. So it was a lot easier. I wasn't managing people per se. I just needed to reach an objective number of surveys. But one of the things that I always appreciate in research is that they're able to document some of the limitations. Right. And I'm sure you're
Woo!
not the only one doing research with collegiate athletes who are also struggling. And so that might be something just that helps you to kind of standardize and normalize the results a bit more. And that you're not comparing to the general population. I don't know what the study is on, but that you're comparing your results to the collegiate athlete population. So hopefully that will help you to normalize things and either show positive or negative outcomes depending on what you're studying. So what are you studying? What's the focus of the research?
Yeah, so it's on energy availability in collegiate athletes, also the prevalence of like iron deficiency, anemia, vitamin D deficiency, things like that. So there's a lot of moving parts. For energy availability, that's basically like a fancy term for saying, are the athletes eating enough calories, eating the right kind of calories to perform at their best, prevent injuries, not have nutritional deficiencies, that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of moving parts for the study, one of which I think I mentioned this before, maybe that we're tracking calorie expenditure. How
Mhm.
many calories are they burning from different exercises? And one of the ways that we are tracking that amongst many is getting them Oura rings. I think I mentioned this, right? Instead of having a Fitbit that you wear on your arm, we're having an Oura ring that you wear on your finger.
Mhm.
And I'm mentioning this because when I went to size the athletes for their Oura rings, I had all these like sizing kits, and the coach was like, "Why don't you pass out the sizing kits and then they can try on the rings and tell you what size they need?" And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I don't trust anybody to do this." I was like, "These rings are too expensive. Somebody's gonna tell me they need a size 6 because they formerly wore a size 6 and they didn't actually size themselves correctly and the ring's too tight and they're gonna tell me they need a different ring." And I'm gonna be like, no. So I was like, had every athlete line up and tell me, okay, what's your size? And they told me size 6 or 7. I was like, put it on, show me. Well, hold your hand up and down, like make sure the ring's not gonna fall off, make sure it's not too loose, make sure it's not too tight. And you would be surprised the amount of sizes that I changed by doing.
So do you have a research coordinator?
I do. They were helping me as well. It wasn't just me. There were 3 of us there that were sizing them, and it was still, shall we say, a challenge. Even the guys, they would come in and they would be like, okay, I was like, which finger do you want to wear it on? And they would point to a finger and tell me this one. And I was like, now, I don't want to get into your personal life, but you do realize that this is your ring finger. So if we give you this ring that you're going to wear, people might assume that you're married. And they go, oh, no, 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 no. I don't want that. I was like, all right, nobody put the ring on your ring finger unless you want people to think that you're married. It was just like a whole mess. And it was just like, okay, now we got to resize you. Anyway, it's been a series of character building days.
And I'm sure the saga will continue. So we will hear more about this people and life is lifing segments in the future. For me, Alicia, I mentioned this on our last podcast episode that we are going through this kind of refinancing process. And it's been a huge learning experience because, we've purchased homes before, but I've never refinanced a loan before. So I've learned a lot. And I'm really happy to be able to share all of my learnings, plus maybe some mistakes with the audience today.
As physicians, one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that we secure our income because a lot of our financial plans are contingent on our high doctor income. One of the things that you will need to do is make sure that you get long-term disability insurance.
Now, Pradeep and his team at PKA Insurance Group have a reputation for putting people over profits and always doing what's best. Do not hesitate to email PKA Insurance and his team today.
They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve. So let's get into our financial focus today, which is going to be on refinancing a home. And Brittany, I'm going to let you take the lead on this because I do not have a home. So I have not refinanced, but I know that you are in the thick of it right now. And I cannot wait to kind of hear some of your pearls of wisdom that you've learned thus far in this process.
Yeah. So let's just kind of start from the beginning. What is refinancing? You can refinance many types of loans, but here we're going to talk specifically about mortgage. And when you refinance your mortgage, basically you are replacing your current mortgage with a new one for ideally better terms. Like that's the whole point of doing this whole exchange. And some of the common reasons for refinancing are lower interest rates, reducing your monthly payments, shortening or extending out your loan term, and then also tapping into home equity. So for us specifically, one of the reasons why is because we were in this high interest rate environment environment as the feds were trying to control inflation. And now they have announced that come September ish, we will see that rates will begin to drop. So we'll see what the trend is for the interest rates. But there has been a drop that I have been able to lock in that will save us a significant amount of money each month and over the long term of our loan. But just because you can refinance doesn't mean that you should. And so, Leisha, we're going to have this conversation about some of the pros and cons, who should and who shouldn't refinance their loans.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into that. But I have a question for you. Since we know that the feds have basically announced that they're going to cut interest rates, what made you decide, or what was the rationale behind you saying, I'm going to lock in this rate now, even though it's almost pretty certain that the rates are going to continue to drop? Like, one may think to themselves, okay, since I know rates are going to drop some more next month, the feds have literally confirmed this. This is not like speculation at this point. Why would I not wait another month? Because then it's like, okay, if I lock in this rate now and they drop again, are you going to refinance again? And then again and again and again each month? How do you know when to pull the trigger? I guess is a better way of asking that question.
That's a really good question. And honestly, I don't know if there is an exact data point or metric that will tell you to pull the trigger. It's kind of like, at least for me, like purchasing our home, I didn't feel 100% certain that it was the right time because we were in this high interest rate environment, but I knew that I had some other things that I desired. So for the interest rates and this prediction, it hasn't happened yet. So by the feds that they're going to drop interest rates, I think it's more likely than less. And me doing it now is because you never will know what the future holds. And so you're always trying to figure out what is going to be the risk and the benefits. And it's really important that when you're shopping your mortgage, that you actually shop your mortgage. When you go to the store, you try on different shirts, you pick them out based upon your preferences of style and color and all of that. And so you also want to take all of those same kind of tenets of shopping when you're shopping for your lender. So when I shopped for this lender, I asked all of those questions of, okay, what is the refinance process? If it is a process that they can offer me, or is there just like a rate adjustment? For us specifically, it's a rate adjustment. So it means that I don't have to pay significant costs each time to refinance the loan. And I have done my due diligence to understand what some of the benefits and the drawbacks are. So that's a long winded answer to say that you don't know what the future holds. So it could be beneficial to lock in your rate and guarantee something that will work for you. You also want to understand what the lender will offer you, because if you can do it again and again and again and lower your interest rate every 2 months without any cost to you, then really it doesn't matter. It's just like maybe an email or maybe a little bit of time that you have to put into that process. But if it's going to mean significant savings, then I think it's worthwhile. And then you also have to figure out your comfort level of just kind of the risk of things not happening as predicted.
I hear you. So I think what you are saying is for you, you've decided to go forward with this process, partly because you can't predict the future, and partly because for you, it may not be a process. It may be rate adjustments that you can do periodically. And so if you have the ability to do frequent rate adjustments, then starting that process of rate adjusting sooner rather than later is more beneficial. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Versus like if you didn't have that rate adjustment and it was a complete refinance new process each time, then maybe you may have made a different decision or made a different calculation.
Yeah. And just to talk about the rate lock process is an agreement that you sign in your closing disclosures, but every mortgage company has a different process for locking their rate. Some companies allow you to float the rate and you can float it over 30 days or 90 days and things of that nature. And there's no additional fees or cost to floating your rate. So essentially what that means is that you can lock in your rate today. So when interest rates drop, say you have a 30-year mortgage and you locked in for 6.5%. And then it's taking you a little bit of time to get your paperwork together. The bank is taking their time doing things. And you see that rates have dropped further. If there is a difference, it depends on the bank, but at least the ones that I've interviewed, if there's a difference of 0.25% lower, you might be able to float down and lock in at that lower rate. So for me, there's really no harm in locking in right now, even if rates drop, because I can always float down to that lower rate at no additional cost. But again, these are some of the details that you need to ask your lender when you are shopping for lenders.
Okay. All right. So now that you've kind of explained that, I know you kind of talked about this before, some of the advantages of refinancing, because I know some people may be wondering if interest rates are dropping, right? And, unless you bought your home in the early 2020s, 2021, where the interest rate was like 2 or 3%, most people would probably benefit. Anybody who probably bought a house within the past year or so may benefit from this rate drop and may say to themselves, oh man, I bought a house, I don't know, 6.5% interest rate and now it's down to 6.4 or whatever. So, what are some of the advantages of refinancing? And is there some sort of formula you use to determine how low the rate needed to be in order for you to benefit from those advantages, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So typically, if the rate drops about 1%, then in my estimation, that's kind of a no brainer. You should probably refinance because when you think about refinancing, the goal is to get better terms, meaning a lower interest rate if you can, and reducing your monthly payments because that's going to be money that you can save on interest and the purchase of your home that you can apply elsewhere. And if you choose to invest that money or pay down debt, then of course that's going to have greater returns on that financial decision in the refinance. So that is one of the greatest benefits. But of course, whenever you're doing this refinancing process, it is a process very similar to when someone purchases a home. And one of the things that we were even talking about before this is that there are some costs to this process. Typically, closing costs we think about when you are refinancing your mortgage. There's going to be costs for an appraisal, there's going to be bank fees like underwriting, there's going to be some attorney fees. And depending on when you close on your refinance, you might have to pay a lump sum of that money for your mortgage, interest, and things of that nature at the time of the refinance. So you want to definitely make sure that there's going to be a benefit in the long term with the cost that you're saving or with the money that you're saving. And typically, 1% is a no brainer that you're going to be able to break even in about 2 to 3 years, if not sooner. Now, when you think about under 1%, we're getting a lower interest rate of about 0.6%, a little bit more than that. And I had to think about how much is this going to cost us and where is that break even point. So I would encourage anyone who's considering a refinance to actually go through and figure out when will you break even from the amount that you're going to save from your monthly payments because of this lower interest rate and the amount that you're going to pay in order to refinance your loan.
Okay, so that makes sense, but help me out here because this probably is like second nature to you because you are in the thick of this. But as somebody such as myself, it's not new information, but I just don't know. Sometimes I found that there's like key details that I'm missing. And it's like if I had those details, I could run with it. And I think that some people may feel the same way when it comes to investing. They know they want to open up a Roth IRA and they've heard that they need to do the backdoor Roth IRA process. But because no one has shown them this is step 1, 2, 3, 4, they haven't gotten started and they're afraid to make a mistake. And I think I feel that way now when it comes to the refinancing process. And so I'm asking you these basic questions, prefacing this by saying these might seem very basic, but if you could just help me out, then I think that I would get a lot more clarity and maybe the audience would as well. So let's say someone's heard, okay, feds are dropping interest rates. They have a mortgage and they're like, oh, I wonder if I could benefit, right? So I think what I'm hearing you say is step one is shop your mortgage. Go to different banks and say, hey, if I were to refinance my mortgage or apply for some sort of rate adjustment program, what would that look like? What interest rate could I get? And I presume that in order to do that, you just walk into a bank or call a bank, or is there like some online form that you fill out? Help me out with step one. How do we do step one?
Yeah. So I think it depends on who you are. Of course, our audience, mostly people in healthcare. So for us, there are physician loan products to purchase your home, and there are also physician loan refinance products. So I particularly identified the companies who I knew had physician loans, and I sent them an email. And you want to give them some details so you don't have to do this whole back and forth type of thing. So it's really important that you share some personal details about yourself. One, who you are and what you do. How long have you been working with your company? About how much money you make. How much is the loan that you're trying to refinance? What your current interest rate is so that they know, oh, we can't offer anything lower than that. Then you also want to tell them how much is remaining on your current loan. Those details are really, really helpful. And then also what your credit score is, because that's going to dictate the interest rate that you can get. That information is really important. So that way they have what they need in order to give you an educated and informed response. So you don't have to waste time going back and forth. So what I did was I basically wrote down a templated email with all of that information. I have my husband's information if you're doing this with someone else as well. And I basically sent that out to multiple lenders, same email to multiple lenders. Then they're going to get back to you with some information. From there, one of the things that I thought was really impactful is having a conversation with them. I don't know. I'm kind of old school. I like to listen to somebody's voice. I like to hear how empathetic they can be, how informed they are when they're speaking and explaining things to me. Because when you're purchasing a home, it's a large investment and you should be able to understand to the best of your ability what you're purchasing, what the fees are in the process moving forward. And so the customer service was really important. Of course, the numbers were really important, right? I wanted to make sure that the interest rate was at a rate that was low and that the mortgage was affordable, but really understanding if they sold the loan and some of those other details were also very important.
Okay. So we got our step one. You're thinking about refinancing. You heard rates are dropping. You send this email. You say, hey, I'm Dr. Alicia Taylor. I'm a physician. I've been working at whatever school of medicine or wherever you work for the last year and a half, or I am self-employed and I've had consistent 1099 income of X amount for X length of time. In 2022, I took out a $400,000 mortgage with a 6% interest rate, and I currently have $380,000 left to pay on that mortgage. I heard that interest rates are dropping and wonder if you have any refinancing products available for people like me who are physicians and what that rate might be and what the costs associated might be. Does that sound sufficient to you,
Yes,
Brittany?
that sounds sufficient. I think
Okay.
with cost, you want to ask specifically is the underwriting fees, because those are the things that will vary from bank to bank. It's basically the cost to you. Some of the other costs are going to be very similar in nature or may differ $100 or so. It's not going to be a significant difference, but the underwriting fees is something that you definitely want to pay attention to between banks. And also, if you have to put a down payment, the amount of down payment that you might need to include for that refinance. But we can talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so when you reach out to them, is it normal for them to know how much it's going to cost you to refinance? I don't know if it's like a general rule of thumb, it's going to cost 3% of your mortgage. And so you can automatically assume that, or if the cost to refinance varies widely and is something that the person that you reach out to is going to be able to tell you. Like, how do you know exactly how much it's going to cost?
I think a good rule of thumb as far as savings for a refinance or purchase of the home, as far as your closing cost, is about 3%. So if you can save 3%, then I think you're going to be in a good range. And ideally, your closing costs will be a lot lower than that. And you can use that money for something else. When you speak with the representative from the bank, they should be able to tell you definitively what the underwriting fee will be, what the attorney fees will be. And then you just have to wait for some of the other closing costs. So recently, during this process, I reviewed our closing disclosures with our bank, and he's like, yeah, these are the draft closing disclosures, because basically they create like a budget for you to give you an estimate. But again, it's just an estimate. And the amount that you might have to pay for prepaid interest could vary depending on when you close on the home. But I think a good rule of thumb is to try to save about 3%. And in all of our past two purchases, it's been about 1.5 to 2.5%. So within that range of 3.
Okay, I mean, that's helpful, but I guess for me, if I'm being honest, I'm a little bit shocked. And maybe this is my naivety because I've not refinanced or purchased a home before, but I think that, I mean, obviously I knew that when you're purchasing a home, a lot of people have to pay a down payment. There are some physician loan products that may not require a down payment. And then in addition to the down payment, I know that I've heard, you want to save between 3 and 10% of the purchase price, right? And so for me, I'm thinking, okay, if someone is buying a house that's $500,000 and even if they don't have have to pay a down payment. 3% of $500,000 is still 15 grand. And let's say they bought that house less than a year ago, or maybe exactly 1 year ago. I didn't realize that the cost to then refinance a $500,000 mortgage is going to cost that person another $15,000. I don't know about you, but as someone who's not married, my emergency fund is pretty decent, but I don't think it's decent enough for me to be paying 15 grand every 6 months or a year as I'm refinancing. It's going to take a minute to save up that amount. So while I knew that there were costs involved with refinancing, I guess I am a little bit shocked at how high those costs seem to be.
Yeah, I hear you. And with the refinance, see, one of the things to think about is, at least in this go around for us, and considering our closing costs per se, the largest chunk of that is the prepaid interest. So, say, for example, we close September 5th, right? We have to prepay the interest for the rest of September, or really it's going to be for like the month of October, because then your new loan will not start until the next month. So, it just really depends on the timing of some of that. If you say, hey, I want to close at the end of the month, so that prepaid interest part is going to be a lot smaller. And that, for us at least, is the biggest chunk. Another thing with a refinance is the attorney fees. So one of the things that I've done is I've always shopped our attorney. I don't use the bank's attorney. That way I can have a say in who we're using and their customer service, because I might want to use them again in the future. And we've always used one attorney, and her fees are very, very reasonable. And I like the way that she communicates. And so her attorney fees are half the cost of the bank's attorney fees. So these are some of the things that you have to think about, but there's definitely a way to make it more affordable. You just have to know that you're going to be paying some upfront cost, and some of that upfront cost will be costs that you probably would have already paid per se, because some of that might be included in your past mortgage payment or your current mortgage payment that now you'll be paying upfront for this new loan that you'll start. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess it's just hearing you talk about this process has made me think a few things. One, it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. You got to think about your loan term. You got to make sure you're getting a good interest rate. You got to shop the interest rate. You got to talk to these people. You got to figure out the cost, shop your own attorney. This seems like a full-time job. And so that's one of the things that I'm thinking. And the other thing that I'm thinking is, I think that I may have been misled, or maybe I myself was just uninformed. Because what I hear a lot of times is people say, if you find the house that you want, just buy the house. It doesn't matter if the interest rate is high, you can refinance later. You marry the house, you date the mortgage, or something along those lines, right? I'm sure some of us have heard some variation of that saying. But as I'm hearing you talk about this process, I am realizing how expensive it is to refinance. I feel like people on social media have made it seem it's just so easy to refinance. Just buy the house and refinance later. And it's like, oh, you have to pay $20,000 to refinance? It's not as easy, at least from my perspective, as I think people have made it seem, at least to me. And it's made me think maybe I should be more diligent and a little bit more prudent about when I buy, so that I do not then have to pay another 10 or 20 or $30,000 to refinance. It's made me want to wait. It's also made me realize how expensive this whole thing is. And now I'm looking at, I think I heard something in the news, Brittany, about the new Harris Walls plan about home ownership and giving $25,000 to first time homeowners. And I'm like, man, I wonder as a physician if I'm eligible for that, because that would be really helpful
Probably
for
not.
me right now. As I'm thinking these elections coming up, I'm like, oh, maybe I need a little help. Maybe I need some down payment assistance, And I'm thinking, good Lord, if me as a physician making multiple six figures need some down payment assistance, what is it like for these non-physicians out here? Oh, it is
Yeah.
tough out here in these streets. Brittany,
Well, Alicia, you just have me cracking up here. Let's say that I think some of what you've said about you marry the home, you date the mortgage is true, but I think it's worthwhile. It's not as complicated as I might be making it seem. When you do a refinance, especially if you work with a different bank, you got to submit documents. It is going to be some time involved. So, for example, with our refinance, literally, we purchased this home June 10th. That's when we closed on the home. But they still wanted enough of reserves. So I had to show proof of reserves. And typically a bank would want 6 months of your mortgage payments in reserve. So that means cash on hand or in retirement accounts or something. So I had to print out 2 months of bank statements that equate to that amount of reserves. And they want to verify that you still are working and that you're making enough to afford your new loan, even though you have a current mortgage and ideally your new mortgage will be lower. They still want the paperwork. We had to submit another credit report and had to pay that be. Thankfully, because our appraisal is within the year, we don't need a new appraisal, but there are some things that you will have to do for a refinance, similar to when you purchase your home. So it's not so easy. And another thing is just to make sure that when you're dating your lender in the beginning, when you're purchasing your home, that you understand what their process is. There's one bank that I was really considering working with for the purchase of our new home that had this rate adjusted physician loan product benefit. And essentially, you submitted an application and then you would pay like $1,500 or 2 grand to adjust your rate. And you didn't have to submit all the documents and all of that stuff. And so I think it just really depends on the bank. But in our case, it's significant amount of savings. Like we will save about $650 each month. And over the course of the year, that's almost 8 grand, right? And so that is really important for us to just make sure that we're saving money, lowering our expenses, and then we can use that money for something else, maybe to purchase another real estate property. And that's 8 grand in 1 year. So just think about what that means over the course of the loan if you have 30-year or 15-year mortgage.
I mean, that makes sense. I guess I'm thinking about, okay, you're saving with the lower interest rate, you're saving 8 grand a year, but then how much did it cost for you to even get that
Mhm.
lower interest rate? And that is the upfront cost
Mhm.
that I'm seeing. And now I'm hearing, you got to submit all these documents, 6 months in reserves. What? I'm just like, I see why people have been unable to purchase
Mhm.
homes or
Yeah.
refinance because people listening may not even be physicians. So maybe they actually do have to put down a
Yeah.
down payment. That's a chunk of money. And all these closing costs when you buy it for the first time, 3% of the home value is not cheap. Then they want to see you have 6 months in reserves. You got 6 months of mortgage payments just sitting in a savings account. Like what? And then if you want to refinance, you got to pay some more money again. And this is not like a couple $100. This is like tens of thousands of dollars. I'm like, this is a lot. My apartment's looking real nice right now.
I hear you. And I really understand your perspective. And that's why refinance is not for everyone. So I just want to highlight a couple of other things that people might be considering when they're refinancing. So we've already talked about one of the cons, the drawbacks is closing costs, that there's going to be some upfront cost. But another thing for you to think about is that there might be an unanticipated cost or an unexpected cost. And one of that is that you're extending the loan term or resetting the loan term. So I think you actually mentioned this in our last episode. And just to kind of talk about this a little bit more, say, for example, or let me take my example actually. We have a 30-year fixed mortgage, and now we're refinancing for another 30-year fixed mortgage. So that means that the amortization schedule is going to start when I close on the new loan. So for us, it's not going to make a big difference. And maybe take a step back to talk about what amortization is if you're unfamiliar. Amortization can refer to the process of paying off debt over time, especially if it's an installment loan. And so they basically calculate how much interest you will have to pay for this loan over time, and they front load that interest. So you'll be paying more interest with each payment in the beginning and less principal. But as you pay down some of that interest, then more of your payments each month will go towards the principal, knocking down your loan. So when you reset the clock, if you're 7 years into your mortgage, then that basically means for those beginning years, more of that monthly payment will be going towards interest and not towards the principal. And in some cases, you can actually end up paying more over time, even though you're getting a lower interest rate.
I hear you. I hear you. As you talk about interest rates, I think about one of the things that I hear all the time, which is, can't you write off your interest on your taxes? There's some school of thought of people saying, well, why would I go through this tedious process and pay all this money to lower my interest rate when I'm already getting a tax break for the interest that I am paying? What would you say to those people?
I would say that yes, you're probably still going to get a tax break even on your interest. And you don't want to necessarily think about tax breaks as the driving force for something, a decision that you're making. For us, there's going to be amounts that's going to be capped. And where we live is a high expense area. So the tax benefit is not, I mean, it's still substantial, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't cover everything, right? And so you want to make sure that you're increasing your cash flow, because by increasing your cash flow, you have more money to do something with and make more value of your time. And the calculus doesn't necessarily make sense in my perspective for the tax savings when I can be increasing my cash flow.
I get what you're saying. One of the things that I always say to people, even though I'm not a homeowner, as they're thinking about this, I'm like, it's not like you get a dollar for dollar savings. Sometimes when people are thinking about tax breaks, they forget this part, especially when it comes to mortgage interest, right? It's not like if you paid $50,000 in mortgage interest that you save $50,000 in
Mhm.
taxes. It reduces your taxable income by 50,000, but then you multiply that 50,000 by your tax rate, right? And so you're not actually saving the full 50,000. I know this can get confusing. I don't want to get into the weeds. My point is that it's not dollar for dollar savings. It's a tax deduction, not a tax credit. So you're only saving a percentage of what you pay in interest. And so you should not go about life paying more for things just to get a percentage of it back in savings. You want to pay less overall. And so that's one of the things that I try to remind people when it comes to thinking about taxes and how that flows into this conversation. But I agree with you in that if you run all the numbers and it shows that refinancing can save you money, then it may be something that you at least want to think about. I think part of my shock as I'm talking to you doing this podcast is all of the nuanced things that are
Mm.
involved, all of the costs that are involved, how high those costs may be. And it's made me really think about, do I want to buy a home now, or do I really want to wait until I have saved substantially more money so that I can then have all the money that I need in reserves and have all of the money that I need in closing costs and have all the money that I need for a potential down payment and have the money that I need for any potential repairs and have the money I need for all of these other things, because it seems like it's a lot. And it honestly reminds me, Brittany, of your story about your coworker. I think you told me a few months ago of how your coworker, like a physician, was saying that because he was not
Mhm.
partnered, it was taking him substantially longer to buy a home. And I think on the surface, to the general public, they can think, well, how can a doctor not afford to buy a home? And it's like, well, if you live in a prominent city, homes are not exactly
Mhm.
cheap. And if you are surviving off one income instead of a dual income, then saving up tens of thousands of dollars for a down payment and then another tens of thousands of dollars in reserves and then another tens of thousands of dollars in closing costs is not exactly the easiest thing to do, even if you are quote unquote high income. And so I'm feeling what your coworker was saying.
Yeah, it takes time, it takes energy, and it takes money for sure. So, anytime you're purchasing a home or refinancing a home, you definitely want to think about it and make sure it's the appropriate time that you have planned for. And also, I think feeling comfortable if you never purchase a home. We were having dinner yesterday and stayed over for drinks. My gosh, I'm like, one glass of wine and I'm done. But nonetheless, we were talking about my husband shared an experience with someone who rented for 40 years. We're like, oh, wow, renting for 40 years. But for some people, it doesn't work out. And you might feel like, oh, I didn't accomplish the American dream. If you rent for a substantial period of time, but it's justified because you like the flexibility, because you want to change locations frequently, etc., then it's perfectly fine to rent and never own a home. And so I think it just really depends on who you are, what your goals are, and how you can define your why.
Yeah, no, I love that. It reminds me of some other people too, especially those who live in very high cost of living areas where even buying a modest fixer upper can cost several millions of dollars
Mhm.
or whatever. Where I've heard some people say, you know what, I'm in a rent controlled apartment. I'm just going to rent and invest the difference and avoid paying substantial costs in home ownership, because it's not just the down payment, the cost of the mortgage, the closing costs, but it's also property taxes. It's also homeowners insurance. It's also HOA fees. It's also all of these other things. And so I think for some people, such as myself, who live in more of a moderate cost of living area. I live in Atlanta. It's not the most expensive city in the world. It's also not the cheapest. It's, moderate, I guess. The numbers work out for me to purchase if I'm going to be in this area long term. But I think for me, at least in the short term, while I do value that flexibility and while I'm in this phase of my life where I'm not currently married and I don't currently have children, renting for me and stacking money on the side so I can afford all these costs and continuing to front load my investments makes a little bit more sense for me at this time, especially while interest rates on homes are still high. Because I'm realizing now through this conversation that purchasing a home with a high interest rate and then trying to refinance is going to cost me a lot of money. So I'm just going to stack my bread on the side. I do want to mention this one thing, which is people who have already purchased and maybe it was a good decision or whatever. And maybe they're thinking about a refinance for a different reason, right? You and I have really had this conversation about refinancing because it may lower your monthly payment, may lower your interest rate. Like these are some really good advantages of refinancing, despite the cons that I was mentioning. But I think another advantage is a cash out
Mm.
refinance and the ability for people to quote unquote tap into some of the equity in their home and take that money out of their home and use it for other things. So, for example, maybe you purchased a home in 2020 and it was for $300,000, right? And now in 2024 or maybe next year, the home goes up in value to $450,000, right? And you're like, ooh, ooh, my home value increased by $150,000. Now you've presumably got at least $150,000 of equity in that home. And some people are like, well, that's great, but I'm struggling to pay for groceries. Or that's great, but I'm trying to pay for private school for my kids. That's great, but I'm still trying to pay off my student loans. And I really wish that there was a way for me to maybe not take out all the equity. You can't even take out all the equity, but take out some of the equity and just use it to pay down some bills, or take out some of the equity and use it to pay for my kids' college. Take out some of the equity and use it for another home if you want to purchase another home. And so one of the things that we always joke around with is, a lot of people are millionaires, but all their money is stuck in
Hmm.
their home, or a lot of their money is stuck in their home. They can't access it. And so some people in those situations, whether it's because they want to access their equity or because they want to use that money to buy another home or pay for other things, they want to take that money out. They want to take some of the equity out of their home. And for those people, refinancing may be an option for them. Have you had any experience with what we call a cash out refinance?
I don't have much experience with a cash out refinance personally. One of the things that I would say is that it's always a numbers game. When you take out that money, what are you going to actually do with the money? If you're going to use it for a trip or something, then hey, we have to live and enjoy life as well. But if you're going to use it specifically for something to pay down debt in order to increase your cash flow, then I think that that could be worthwhile. One of the things that you just want to think about with a cash out refinance is that you want to ensure that there's still enough equity within the home just in case the home value drops and you want to sell and then you end up paying more money on the back end. So that's the one thing, is that you're reducing the equity in your home, and say you don't want to stay in that home for a long period of time, and say real estate evaluations drop, then you might end up paying more on the back end of that decision. So that's the one caution. You want to make sure that you leave enough cushion to support any kind of market downturns and life doing its thing.
Yeah, yeah. I don't even think that you can take all the equity out. I think you have to leave like 20 or 30% of the equity in there. So for those listening, let's say you have $100,000 of equity in your home. You could maybe refinance in order to take some of that money out, but you would have to leave 20 or $30,000 of equity in the home. And so how that would work, correct me if I'm wrong, Brittany, is let's say someone's got a mortgage at 4% interest rate and they've got $100,000 of equity in their home. And they say, you know what, I really want to take $50,000 of that equity out. How that would work is they would refinance. Now, keep in mind, when you refinance, you get a new loan term. So if you've already paid 4 years worth of payments, now you refinance, now you're starting over again at another 30-year mortgage, or you're starting at a 15-year mortgage, or whatever mortgage term that you choose. And then you're getting a different interest rate based on current economic climate. But it may give you the ability to take out a substantial amount of money from your home. Now, the downside of that is now you have less equity in your home,
Hmm.
of course, but at least you get access to that money. Some people may say, you know what, I want to use some of that money to invest, or I want to use some of that money to pay down a large bill or whatever. But I think that it does give people that option. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of people tapping into equity just to spend it on a big trip. But I think that if you were tapping into equity to invest it in some other way, I think that could be at least maybe a decent consideration. Do you think that it's something that you and your husband would do?
That we would tap into the equity in the home? I don't think so, honestly, unless we had a really, really, really great reason to. So, right now, we're able to afford all the things that we want and pay our bills on time and have money left over to invest independently. So, there's no reason to. There's no reason to tap into the interest of a home. There could be opportunities where we want to purchase a cash flowing real estate property. And if we were to use that money for that, then I could consider doing a cash out so that we could have more money to purchase another property that's going to generate cash flow. But again, we got to have a really good reason, and the math has to math.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So as we're closing out this financial focus, I just wanted to ask you, are there some situations in which maybe someone should not refinance? Who should maybe avoid refinancing right now?
I would say there are a couple of categories. If you do not plan on staying or keeping that home for 3+ years, then you likely should not refinance. The reason why is because of closing cost, right? And so it's going to take some time for you to break even. And you want to make sure you do your math. But if you're not going to stay in the home for a long term, you should probably just stick with your current loan if you want to sell the home soon. Another is if you're on a really tight budget. We talked about a lot of the closing costs. And so there are going to be some upfront closing costs that will likely be more than what your mortgage is, right? And so if you are someone who has a lot of credit card debt, yes, you have a loan, but you're able to pay everything off with your mortgage, but you have a lot of credit card debt, you're not going to be able to do a refinance because you likely cannot afford the upfront cost.
And if you're someone who has a current mortgage, but have had other types of money mishaps occur and your credit score is not very good, it may not be the best time because of the way that they will estimate the mortgage interest rates and the difference might not be substantial enough in the interest rates to actually validate that process of closing and the cost associated with it because you're not going to save a significant amount of money because of the interest rates going to be closer together because you're not a good candidate at that time. So, if you're going to move, if you are struggling to kind of have positive cash flow, have a surplus of money at the end of the month and an emergency fund to afford the upfront cost, and if you're someone with a lower credit score now and likely are not a good candidate for borrowing at this time.
Alrighty. So I don't know. I feel like I fit into some of those categories, but let me just say this conversation has been so enlightening for me. I don't even know if our listeners got anything out of it. I'm sure they did, but I learned so much. I knew some of the benefits of refinancing, right? You could take out some of your equity and use that money, right? You could lower your interest rate. You could lower your monthly payments. That's amazing. What I didn't know is some of the cons in terms of how involved that process is, how time consuming it seems to be, how costly it seems to be. And then hearing you talk about the people who need to hold their horses, that was kind of me. I feel like you were talking to me. Those on a tight budget, I feel like I am. Those who don't have enough in reserve, those who don't have no equity, I don't even have a house. It was just like you were talking to me. You were saying, Leisha, hold your horses. And so maybe at some point, as we continue doing this podcast, I'll be in the camp where I can start buying and can talk about my process. But at least we get to talk about yours. There are certain times when we do this podcast where I'm very much reminded of the fact that you have substantially more money than I do. And I'm like, okay, this is one of those times. It's like, how much money did you pay for this? And you paid that for that and that for that. And you still had 6 months in reserves? Girl, that would have wiped me out. But it's really nice. What I'm trying to say in a very long winded way, it is very nice to have these conversations with somebody who is a few steps ahead of me, at least in this area that I can learn from. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Leisha. And this is so fun. I also learned a lot from you. And I really am just grateful that we found each other and that we're in different phases of our lives and have similar interests, but different levels of expertise. So I've really learned so much from you. And thank you for being so nosy because, girl, you put me in the hot seat some days. I'm like, sweating over here, answering Alicia's questions, and this is supposed to be the easy part.
Oh man, yeah, I'm definitely nosy at baseline. But anyway, thank you for rolling with it. All right, and now we're gonna get into our fun money segment. Brittany, what is something fun that you are doing with your money?
Well, recently, and maybe this is some more of my husband's money. Recently, we went on a date night. I mean, it's all one pot, effectively, But we went on a date, and y'all know I'm frugal. Like, I'm frugal. So my husband is not so frugal. And I always have to take a deep breath, one, know that we have the money in the bank, also. And then a part of my brain starts to strategize on how can I leverage this expense for a tax deduction. So my husband and I went to this very high-end restaurant and we ate well. It was great conversation so much that I lost track of time and had to text our nanny like, "Can you stay for 45 more minutes?" because I completely lost track of time. And during the strategizing of how can I leverage this expense for a tax deduction, I was like, oh, let me just throw in a conversation about my husband's business and what he's doing with it and give him an update on like where the cash balance plan stands and what we're doing with some of the other things that are with the taxes and the budgeting and some of the expenses and all of that. So we had that money discussion during our date. And now I've documented all of the conversation, basically business minutes, and we can use it as a business expense.
Wait, so I love this. I love this because now I'm going to start talking about business with all my friends whenever they want to eat at expensive restaurants. So help me out to make sure I'm doing this correctly. You don't have to talk about business the entire length
No.
of the dinner, right? And from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, when you document what you talked about during the meeting and have a copy of the receipt and the date and the time and all that stuff, that's more for your own documentation. It's not like when you submit your taxes, you have to submit that at the time. You only need it if you get audited, right?
Correct.
Not telling anybody to do what I'm thinking. Okay, just for my own knowledge now. I just, was clarifying. So I could theoretically, Brittany, have my birthday celebration and turn that into a business conference. And then I don't have to talk about business the entire length of the conference, correct? I'm just asking. I'm asking because, you'd be steps ahead of me. And I know you got Miss Alexis over there as your tax professional. I know she's not going to make you do anything illegal. So I just want to know. I just want clarity.
Yeah. So I don't know necessarily about a birthday bash. It depends, right? You want to document who's there, who's present, what you all discussed, and all of the information. You're right. It's only if you get audited, but there might be a way that you can turn a nice dinner into a business expense. So, say, for example, you and your girlfriends go out to brunch. It's a birthday brunch. And you're like, hey, on the podcast, we're doing this. Or I spoke at AFP and this is some of the questions that I got. What do you all think about this? Do you all have any ideas for the podcast? I think you could probably share a lot of that expense, and maybe it wouldn't be the entirety of the expense, but you can share a lot of that expense because you're effectively doing some market research at that time. You're sitting with your friends and they're your target audience, and you're asking them questions about what would they be interested in, what are they doing with their finances and things of that nature over dinner. When you think about these larger companies, right, we get these all the time, focus groups for physicians, or you might go out to some nice restaurant and they talk about their services and Roth IRAs, for example. Then all of that is marketing and it's also marketing research. So there's a way that you can leverage it and do it well. Of course, you want to have the appropriate documentation.
Okay. You heard it from her words, her lips to my ears. Okay. I heard it. I heard it. I heard you say it. And I'm taking notes. So thank you for that. Thank you for the clarity. At some point, we might need to have Alexis on again to make sure that I don't go to jail. Something fun that I'm doing with money is I've been traveling a lot lately. And although I have decent luggage, I've been looking for like a new personal item because you know how you have like a personal item in a carry on when you're flying? And when I'm flying domestically, I hate checking bags just because I like to get to my final destination. Every time I check a bag, I have to wait 30 minutes at the carousel. Sometimes the baggage might be delayed or whatever. So I try to avoid checking bags whenever possible. And so that means I'm stuffing my luggage. And so I'm stuffing my carry-on. But the personal item has always been hit or miss because I feel like I'm a doctor now. I feel like I'm a decent age. And so I kind of want to stroll through the airport with a nice purse or something, look sophisticated. But inevitably what happens is I end up rolling through the airport with this North Face backpack on because it's so large and I can fit so much stuff in there. And I already kind of looked young, especially when I'm strolling through the airport in workout clothes. And so I'm like, how can I pack as much stuff as possible and not look 17? I'm like, okay, I need to upgrade my personal items so that I'm not always having to carry a backpack. Not that there's anything wrong with a backpack, but I just would like something different. And so I've been shopping around and looking for a personal item like mini duffel, leather mini duffel that will sort of sit on my rolly bag or that has a little trolley pocket thingy so that I can sit it on my rolly bag. So that's what I'm doing with my money is trying to buy some sophisticated travel items.
Alicia, one, I love that. You're always traveling, and I think it would get a lot of use. And I am also thinking, didn't this girl just buy a bag when she was in Paris?
Yes, but not really. Okay, so here's the thing. The bag that I bought in Paris, it was not a travel bag. When you're buying luxury bags or at least buying a Louis Vuitton bag, obviously each bag has different sizes and there's different designs or whatever. But I bought a Neverfull, which is kind of like your classic looking Louis Vuitton bag. Anyway, there's different sizes. And my friends, there's like a small, medium, large, if you will. They call it different names, but that's essentially what it is. And my friends were like, we're going to get the medium or large because we want to use it as like a personal item when we travel. And I purposefully did not get that size. So I could have. If I would have gotten a medium or a large, I could have used it as my travel bag. I did not. I got the small one because I'm sort of a slim person and I wanted a purse. If I'm going to pay this much money for a designer bag, I wanted to be able to use it a lot. And even though I travel a lot, I don't feel like I travel enough to warrant spending that much money on just a bag that I'm only going to use in the airport. I wanted sort of an everyday bag. And so I'm saying all of this to say that the bag that I got from Louis Vuitton is not what I would consider a personal item bag that I would wear through the airport. It's more of like an everyday sort of purse. And also I like to be a little bit more discreet-ish, I guess, when I'm traveling through the airport. And so I didn't want such a expensive designer bag to be something that I'm traveling with like that. I don't know. It's just personal preference.
I get it. I get it. I get
But I
it.
hear what you're saying.
All right. So we just want you to know that refinancing can be a powerful tool, but it requires a little math and careful consideration. So if you are thinking about refinancing or even purchasing a home, I think it's definitely worthwhile thinking about some of the things that we talked about and shopping your lender And we just want you to know that whatever money decision you make, not the end of the world most often, and that you can always figure it out. Marry the home, shop the mortgage, or don't do either and just keep renting like Leisha because she's like, hey, this is too expensive. So anywho, we want to say thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
Hello, everybody. It's me, Brooke. I'm recording a little disclaimer for my mommy, Dr. Brittany Halford, and her friend, Dr. Lisa Taylor. Just so you know, they're not financial advisors, tax professionals, lawyers, or financial planners. Everything you hear is for education and entertainment. It's not strict financial advice, you know. So use your best judgment, chat with a tax professional, and all those other people that you need to talk to. Thanks for tuning in today. Keep cruising on your journey to wealth and wellness. Bye-bye.
Hey, Brittany, I don't know about you, but taxes are always a pain.
I know we always have to pay, but the amount of taxes we owe has decreased significantly after working with Alexis and her team at Cerebral Tax Advisors.
Cerebral Tax Advisors is more than just a company of CPAs. They're actually a company full of tax strategists that can help you keep more of your hard-earned money. They're effective communicators and can let you know when something needs to be done ahead of time and walk you through it so that it's done correctly.
What I love most is that they send mid and end of year tax reviews so that you're always prepared and can take strategic action throughout the year. Alexis and her team have saved me money, time, and peace of mind. You deserve to keep more of what you earn. Reach out to Cerebral Tax Advisors today at cerebraltaxadvisors.com. One of the most important things you can do is ensure you have long-term disability insurance. Long-term disability insurance secures your income if the unexpected happens and you are unable to work due to medical illness, chronic conditions, or an accident.
Unfortunately, all insurance agents aren't created equal. Some of them are so focused on making a sale that they fail to reveal certain necessary information, tell you about discounts available, or clearly explain the process. Prati Botto and his team at PKA Insurance Group are different. They have a reputation of putting people over profits and always doing what's best.
If you need life insurance or disability insurance, reach out to Pradeep and his team today. They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve.